I guess I'll start with Kim, since you do both Christian Buddhist. My question is about prayer, and what, in your experience, has the role of prayer been in helping to address trauma? And the reason I ask that question is, as you're describing the meditations that you do, sometimes even with a client, the idea of telling someone, hey, meditate this way, breathe differently, do this, right? It seems less intrusive than, hey, the way you pray is actually not helping with your trauma. Maybe you should pray differently. Now again, I'm wondering, logically, intuitively, it should be appropriate, but I'm wondering if you've ever done that.
I think that's the question. I think prayer can very often be a form of meditation. And I think some people who have their spiritual practices, praying for several minutes in the morning, for example, may for them be very much a form of meditation. It may have the same effect on them physiologically and mentally as meditation. But there are different kinds of prayer. I mean, it's interesting. In the Won Buddhist temple, part of our services we pray. Now, it's not a theistic religion, but we pray to the Dharma Buddha within us. And that we will, that Dharma Buddha that is within our soul will rise up and take charge. And I was very struck by, when I was studying at Union Seminary, by, I can't remember the name of this Catholic theologian, a woman, Simone Weil, who talked about prayer as listening, not as supplication, but as listening. And I think if prayer becomes more a question, and I think the type of prayer that is quiet, that listens, that is listening, quote, for the voice of God, or listening for the inner voice, or listening to your body, that kind of prayer is very helpful and probably equally as beneficial as meditation.
In my experiences as a chaplain and now, I find I would never tell someone to pray differently, but I will ask questions, because I think sometimes the way we pray, and I think I learned this as a new chaplain, the person said, I've lived this wonderful life, I've been a good person, and I've told to ask God for things, and you will receive. And I've asked that this be cured, and I've asked that, and it's not happening, and there's a crisis. Because in Christianity, we are often taught, pray, ask. A colleague of mine had a sermon once, God is not a microwave. So she tried to address this. But there's definitely an understanding of prayer in terms of asking, or God is not Santa Claus. And I think there is something actually that traumatizes our believers in seeing prayer as something where you ask and receive, and you're not receiving. And it points out to what you were saying earlier about kind of self-blame. Well, there's something wrong with me. If I were good enough, faithful enough, kind enough, I would have received the answer to my prayer. So I think that's a real something we have got to address in the Christian tradition, and are not doing well enough across the board. And also, I was talking to Mary, and I wanted to say, as representing, my experience of the Christian tradition, if you've met a Christian, you've met exactly one Christian. So, a disclaimer.
I just wanted to say in relation to your question, Eddie, that I spent many years with a meditation practice that left me feeling like a failure. And it was a practice that had a certain program to it. And I always wondered, how is it that other people found it so rewarding? Because I didn't. But I wasn't able to say, this is not rewarding for me. The only thing I was able to say is, I'm failing at this. And so it was only really when I was able to break out of a certain structure that prescribed, this is what meditation is, and then discovered that for me it had much more to do with nature, and with the outdoors, and with beauty, and with art, music, and poetry, that I understood more about what meditation would be for me.
I'd like to just comment. That reminds me of, there was a saint in the Catholic Church named Francis de Sales, who used to tell his disciples and seminarians, if saying prayers keeps you from praying, you should stop saying prayers. and that there are different ways to do that. And I often, with my clients, when we talk about meditation, they're like, I can't do it, I can't do it. And I say, well, it would be great if you could meditate, for 20 minutes once a day. But you could also try meditating for 1 minute, 20 times a day. And that has been a starting point for lots of people like that.
More than a question, this is a reflection. I, for many years, have done a kind of psycho-spiritual counseling. And I have a practice of always ending a session by going to prayer. I say, let's go to prayer. And what that does is that it gives the person a chance to reflect and synthesize on the takeaways from the session and set an intention going forward. And I think that prayer, more than supplication and begging, like a child to a parent, is more about, I think that if in prayer, gratitude can be found, it opens the door to the right mindset to receive whatever it is that comes.
So I was very moved, and I would say stunned out of my perpetual numbing by Mary's presentation. And what I noticed is how much that numbing for me is present. You talked about collective traumatization and vicarious collective traumatization. There is just so much violence in the world right now that we are so aware of because of the internet and all the media. It's overwhelming. And I notice how much I'm tuning out lately and how much that numbing is prevalent for me. And then it's sort of like, and then I have a moment where you present something and I'm moved and feeling like I need to do something, and then I think, then the numbing comes in again, like, well, there's so much to do, what do I do? And so and it reminds me, like, I'm so removed. So, of course, someone who's living this kind of, your client or person you're helping, what that must be like for them, magnified my feelings. And how do you, I guess this is a multi-question, like when someone, and I guess I'm thinking about a couple of things about the lake and the question that was asked before, but how do you deal with, like, it's pebbles in a lake versus like a meteor, and how do you deal, like, extreme stuff, like we have daily little, lowercase traumas, but big ones and collective ones, and how do you deal with that, maybe from a mindfulness perspective, but also, like, how do you deal with it from a faith perspective? Because, there's a big question, I'm a person of faith, I'm Jewish faith, and there's a big question about faith after the Holocaust. Was it always like, how could people have faith? And I think to myself sometimes, like, I don't know, like, I'm such a person of faith and it really helps me, but I don't know if I lived with the Holocaust. I don't know if I had been your client. I don't know if I had walked the path of so many of these people, whether I could continue to really have faith with that much trauma, because I would really feel abandoned by God. So how do you help people that feel like abandoned by God, and have maybe aren't able to even articulate it because they're so numbed out? And how do you deal with that? So that's a masking sort of the faith, the Christian tradition and the Buddhist. Like, how do you deal with the meteor that falls in the lake? So that's my question.
The meteor. You're like, how about this?
I know there are so much going on in the world, but at the same time, I think it's a lot of times it's from King's name, the Buddhist name, the balance is the key, keeping a reality. I mean, we're talking all these important topics here, but when time comes, we'll go out, have lunch, we feed ourselves, we do our own daily things and continue our greater kind of works out there. I think it's very important for us to have that kind of view as an individual, including the self-care plus. But also when we also think about all these crises in the world, we're all so easily overwhelmed. But then I ask my students or people, or sometimes also I ask myself, okay, step back, breathe, and think about it. What is it that I wanna do? I mean, why is that kind of urgent thing that maybe I wanna change the world? Maybe I wanna make the change. Like, I think it's I want us as an individual to take time really to think about it and then be realistic. Again, as you may see that I'm super kind of practical person that, and I don't really expect this world to be perfect in my lifetime. There are always gonna be, things that problematic in the world. Again, it's the kind of it comes from the very deep contemplation of the understanding of the nature of life as well. But I know we all have these good intentions, but also for us, when we say the wisdom, meaning that how we make this good intention to be real. And that's another matter. One thing that I want to do good for the world, but then how I do it is a separate word. So that we really need to have that reality, understanding, and the wisdom and some skillful means to do it. So each one of us, from where we are, we can have a different approach to that.
Let me say a word about that too. I think a couple of things come to mind. One is, there's always, I think one reason we're dealing with trauma today and why this is coming up in so many conferences is because our society has been traumatized the last couple of years. In 40 plus years of doing therapy, the last 2 years is the first time that I've found a majority of my clients dealing with political trauma. It's a different age, it's a different time. But I think two things. One, CBT has been helpful in helping us to feel that, sometimes it's good to do a little bit of conscious suppression. One thing that I'm constantly telling many of my clients is don't watch the news so much. Don't watch CNBC MSNBC from 6 o'clock till midnight every night, because if you do, you're going to be depressed. You can watch it for 15 minutes and probably get what's going on, and it'll just get repeated again and again. So part of it is just not constantly being drawn like a magnet to the traumatizing agent, which may be a little bit what Mary was talking about, repetition, that we're so caught up in it that we can't take our eyes off of it. But I think we need to. I think sometimes we're saying, don't think, just think, try to replace that depression with what am I positively doing? What am I personally positively doing in my life? As a therapist, I'm seeing maybe 20 people a week. 20 out of how many billions? Is that really important? Yes, to me it is. And I have to keep saying that what I'm, the pebbles in the lake that spread, and the waves that get larger and larger as they spread out, I think that's where I want to put my focus as much as I can achieve that.
I think one of the things that we do is just witness to people's disappointment in God and their sense of betrayal and hurt, and just witness to that. And sometimes by hearing that, people will stay there and just mad at God and disappointed, and that's where they are. Other times, there will be a process where people say, well, I know my reality is what it is. So maybe it's my concept of God that needs to change. Maybe my understanding of that is just, and I think what I do is just witness to that by simply saying, how hard, yes, to ask for that and not get it. How hard is that? Mm-hmm. How awful. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes by just staying there, someone says, well, if you believe that God is a loving source and energy to not provide, to not assist, what a hard place to be. And then someone begins to say, there can begin to perhaps be that journey of yeah, it's not me, it's not my failing. The reality is what it is. My understanding of God, it needs to change.
Just a quick comment. I'm thinking, Kim, about Elie Wiesel and so many of his writings, one of which is called Night. And I take solace from somebody like Elie Wiesel, who, you know, the question of faith after the Holocaust is a very big question, right? Faith after the Holocaust? Discuss. And you take a person like Elie Wiesel, how did he do it? And, you know, for me, that's really important. Or Nelson Mandela walking out of Robbins Island 27 years later. I don't know if you folks remember, I do, watching the television, and watch Nelson Mandela walk out and shake the hands of his guards. And you think, oh.
Viktor Frankl's another.
Again, I think we're at a point where, are you okay? We'll one more question, okay. But then we're gonna just wrap up with your evaluations. One more question.
I have to run, but thank you, and so glad to be here for both sessions. I don't know if this is a question or a request, maybe both. I'll ask you as a question, what ways can you develop something like this that actually is about self-care for the caregiver? How do we bring our faith and our values and our religious traditions into our self-care when there's secondary trauma, which is persistent?
Now, that's a good question to end on. Here we go. Who would like to start?
I actually have a book title. It's in my bag.
Oh, it's in the bag. Here, okay. The Mary Poppins bag.
But I want to suggest this book. I found it helpful. It's called Trauma Stewardship. An everyday guide to caring for self while caring for others. And I think it's just a great book. First of all, it has fabulous New Yorker cartoons. They're funny. I mean, laughter is really important.
Yeah.
Kristen, who's the author? Sorry. It's Laura Vandernoot Lipsky. Laura, and then VAN space GERNOOT space LIPSKY. And I found it such a helpful book. And it starts off where she's on vacation, and she's with her family, and they're overlooking the ocean. She's on a cliff, and they're kind of surveying, you know, the vista. And she found everybody saying how beautiful it is, and she was standing there thinking, how many people have jumped? And then she says she goes to places and she sees someone alone at a table with a styrofoam cup and starts crying for them. And she said, okay, I need a little help, you know. So I just wanted to mention this book because I think it gives examples from environmental trauma to what refugees are going through, to domestic violence, to just to health. Just every sort of example, and I found it very helpful. So I just wanted to mention it.
Self-care, my favorite thing. Exercise, of course. We have to do that. Body, you know, healthy body brings the healthy mind. That's one thing. And one other thing is that for me that especially for like a religious person or I guess many of you, that you listen a lot of others' traumas, right? But then I also like to have, you know, maybe not the equal, but there's somewhat similar percentage of the people that I can talk myself to others. So having that, you know, relationship, I think that's also key as well.
Just one more thought too about how seriously we take ourselves. One of my favorite writers is Dorothy Day, and her granddaughter wrote a beautiful book called The World Would Be Saved by Beauty, and it was Dorothy Day's favorite quote by Dostoevsky. And this book, there's Dorothy Day, a line where she says, you know, there are the saints and the martyrs, and the saints are the ones who live with the martyrs. And I just thought that was, you know, a point about, too, how much are we taking on in our work that we become martyrs as well, and that's just...
Well, thank you to the panel, and thank you to everybody for being here. If you are here and looking for your CECs, everybody please fill out your evaluations, but the evaluations are essential if you want these CECs. There'll be 3 people just out here one will collect your evaluation form, then the next person will actually have your certificate already. If for some reason we didn't have your license number, we also have a certificate for you. That'll be the 3rd person, and we'll handwrite that in. Thank you very much for being here, and thanks again to the panel.